We will go now with Mark Young. Um, he was on the board of the Alliance for Just Money, and he got into monetary reform. He had an economics background, so he understood what was going on. And actually, he got a really nice little booklet that you can still get online. We're now sharing screen, so it might not be visible, but the title is How to Fix the Future Using Cooperative Economics. We'll keep it short at that. If Mark, you want to add more to that introduction, please feel free, or just take it off from here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Overt. Hey, so again, my name is Mark Young. My background is in urban planning, and also in economics. And so everybody kind of has their thing. Some people are into MMT, some people are into CDBC, some people are into analyzing the current system. My thing is kind of figuring out how the new system would work. Because ultimately, I think that is very, very important. And it seems in the monetary reform movements that the majority of our time is focused on analyzing the current system and analyzing the current problems. And in a planning background, what you do to solve problems is you move to what you want to see at the end first, and then you kind of back into how you solve the problem. So I do this presentation. I've done it before. I do it again because I think it's just very, very important that we recognize the obstacles, because at some point in time when you're trying to change the world, people are going to have something to say. People are going to be critical, and they're going to try to poke holes in whatever it is you're trying to do. And so doing these kind of thought experiments, I think, helps us to understand things that may come up, things that we may have missed. Unintended consequences. Anybody who knows or is familiar with legislation knows the product of unintended consequences, that the best intentions can have bad outcomes sometimes. And so I want to make sure that we're aware of all of our possible unintended consequences. So the first thing I want people to understand is that, for me, this is the solution, right? It's creating a monetary system and thinking about things not from the standpoint of just technically what should be changed, but what is the outcome that we want to be changed also, right? And so sovereign monetary reform ultimately should not be turned into a competition between nations. We already have that. We have plenty of competition between nations. We have plenty of conflict, warfare. We have plenty of nations restricting other nations in all types of ways, with all types of requirements and constructs and everything else that when they think people aren't acting right. But should instead be a reform that levels the playing field between nations and allows all nations to raise their respective citizen standards of living, improve national economies and infrastructure, and tackle long-standing social ills in a fair and just manner. So for me, that's kind of the principal statement of what I want a system to do. And if you go from that standpoint, then you have to think about the unintended consequences that can arise from monetary reform. So the need for monetary reform is to focus on solutions to international issues surrounding our free market systems, geopolitical structures, not only on our national movements and structures. I think we focus on our national movements and structures a lot. I don't think we focus enough on the international issues. I'm also a core member of the International Movement for Monetary Reform, along with Domenico and Jesse and a couple of others. And these are the things that we talk about, not in as much detail as I would like, because we still are doing other things also. But sovereign money reform needs an international framework to be successful. because we have an international system currently in place. We have a global market in place. We trade with other partners, other nations, other businesses. Most of the stuff you buy probably comes from other countries beyond the country that you live in. So the question then becomes, can you replace something, which is our existing system, with nothing, and note something with no international framework? So that's the main concern. And so when you think about it in these terms, it can create some issues that I think as monetary reformers, we have to address. Monetary reform by a single nation is one. How would nations account for money created under monetary reform? How would nations use the money that they create under sovereign money? And is there any role for the United Nations in monetary reform? So in this monetary reform by a single nation, basketball is my favorite sport. So I'm going to use some basketball analogies to kind of drive home the points that I'm making. So the first one is monetary reform by a single nation. One of the first questions that arise when discussing monetary reform on an international level is, can monetary reform by a nation be done in a vacuum by only one nation while maintaining the current debt system that exists in other nations under the international framework? I think we would find that it would be very, very difficult. And for a sports analogy, let's take the NBA. Basketball is my favorite sport. Basketball has certain rules, right? And so basketball has an umbrella NBA association, right? That makes all the rules. If they want to change the way fouls are called, or the way traveling is called, or how many 3-pointers you could shoot, or the time clock, all that has to go through the National Association. So under monetary reform, under this analogy, each different basketball team is like a nation, right? And so then the question becomes, can a nation or a single basketball team change the rules that are now being implemented by the NBA Association? So for instance, in this analogy, could I live in Indiana, so we have the Indiana Pacers here. Could the Indiana Pacers say, you know what, instead of a 3-point shot, we're going to give our team 4 points every time they shoot a 3-pointer instead of 3 points? Well, you can see very quickly that the whole NBA Association is going to get very upset, and that's not going to be fair to the other teams. And so what would happen if they let each NBA team start making their own rules? Well, they're going to make rules according to their roster, what makes the best sense for them. So I'm going to say that 3-pointers are worth 5 points. Somebody else is going to say, well, I can have 7 defenders on the floor at any one time instead of 5. It goes on, right? For each of the 30-some teams that are NBA, you'll have all types of different rules. You wouldn't be able to ref it. That's a problem, and that can be a problem with monetary reform. So another worthy thought experiment would be to contemplate what would happen if the United States implemented a sovereign monetary reform first. Because of the United States status as the largest economy, and also the main issue is acting as the reserve currency, could they do it? Now, under the first situation, if you did it, you would probably likely get sanctions, international sanctions from all types of banks. And the United States, I guarantee you, if it's not the United States, they would sanction you because you're going outside of the international framework. And they will probably freeze all your bank accounts and cause your economy collapse. Your economy wouldn't collapse because of monetary reform. Your economy would collapse because the United States put sanctions on you and cut off all your financing and trade and everything else so that you don't go outside of that framework. So then the question comes, what would happen if the United States did it? Well, the United States could probably pull it off, but what would happen next? So if the United States, under our democracy and under our capitalistic structure, said, okay, well, we're going to do monetary reform. We're going to pass the NEED Act or what have you. And we're just going to let everybody else do whatever they want to do. So what would happen first? The United States passed the NEED Act or some American Monetary Reform Act or whatever it comes up to be when it's time to do it. Because of the way our separation between our capitalistic industries and our government, we would do it in a certain way. Now, if they did it, you can be sure that the biggest economies are going to come next. China's going to do it. Russia's going to do it. India's going to do it. All the European countries are going to do it. All the countries in Africa and so everybody's going to do it. But they're going to do it in a way that pushes competition and increases competition, right? So if the United States says, look, we're going to do monetary reform so that we can have free healthcare, we can fix all our bridges, we can provide a better living standard for our seniors, we're going to do free education, we're going to make sure that there's 100% employment and a universal basic income, all these other things. Now, if China does it, China may do it differently. China may say, well, I'm going to do it a little differently because I want to, right? And so they could say, well, I'm going to create money to buy down wages so we can have a more creative, a more competitive industry and get greater market share, right? So they could easily say if they're paying somebody, let's just say in US dollars, $5 an hour, they could say, you know what, I'm going to create sovereign money and give it to this business, which China owns like 30% of all the businesses in China, I believe. I'm going to give them and make them pay $250. I'm going to give them $2.50 an hour, and the company's only going to pay $2.50 an hour. So then they can lower their prices so they can get better market share. So it makes it very easy for market manipulation, depending on what you're doing. So in that, I think you have to take a step back and try to think out how can these things work together for a solution that lowers competition, that doesn't increase competition. So another big point is accounting for money created under monetary reform. This debt-based structure reflects the backbone of the global accounting system in which we operate. It allows governments, businesses, and individuals to act within the system where monetary value can be verified and trusted. That is our debt system. The more money is just like on an individual basis, the more money you have or the more income you have, the more money you can borrow. That's why MMT says that debts don't matter. Well, it don't matter to the United States because we can always create money to pay it off. It matters to other countries. Ask Greece if the debt matters. Ask other countries that are debtor nations if debt matters. I guarantee you they will have a different answer than what MMT proponent may say. And that's because the system is not on a level playing field. And so do you want to continue with that? Or do you want to change that? The fact remains that sovereign money reform as currently proposed does not offer any such international accounting for newly created money. Right now, what we are saying is that every nation should go forth and create money as they see fit according to what their national needs are. My pushback with that would be that can create all types of unforeseen and unintended consequences, right? And so if United States did it under the last example, and then Russia said they were going to do it, and Russia wants to be a superpower again, what may Russia use their sovereign money for? They could use it to increase their military advantage or increase their military. Now, some could say, well, they would have to have enough people and enough production capacity to actually do that. Well, yeah, but they're a dictatorship. So if Putin wants 100,000 people to go work on building more tanks and planes, he's going to get 100,000 people to go do that. If he needs to shift his national resources because now he has the money to do it into military production, he can do that. Russia already has the technology it needs to do these things, and so does China for that matter, or any other country that you may think of, any other country that the United States may label as a rogue nation would have the ability to do pretty much whatever they want to. What does it mean for a dictator who now has the ability to give his citizens a basic income? Does that secure his power forever? Will international monetary reform be between democratic nations, or will they be between nations that we consider dictatorships that we don't necessarily want to do business with and we want them to not succeed? But if everybody's doing monetary reform, there's nothing at all to stop a Putin, or right now in China, I mean, he's basically a dictatorship, or even North Korea, from giving out basic incomes to lift those people up and make sure that they can maintain their dictatorship forever. So we've never talked about whether or not these type of things should just be between democratic nations or representative governments, or whether dictatorships should have to be pariahs and not be allowed to enter into this system. The next one is the national use, which goes kind of back to how it's created, but the national use. Could nations, and I mentioned this earlier, could or should nations sovereign debt money be used to subsidize for-profit businesses, which could result in an unfair manipulation of free market competition? Now, here in the United States, we subsidize some for-profit businesses, but it could be a lot higher. And, you know, we haven't really explored what it can mean to free market competition. China is accused all the time of manipulating the dollar and manipulating fair competition. What would they do under sovereign money when they don't have the same restraints, when they don't have to show that I can produce this much tax income, that's why I can borrow this much money and my economy is so large? Could or should a nation's sovereign money power be used for military spending? I mentioned that earlier, which could result in various national and regional arms races of an exponential growth in the military industrial complex. What does it mean to two maybe smaller nations? Maybe we're not talking about G20 or G8 nations that are in conflict with each other. And now they have the ability, because the United States has done it, to create their own sovereign money. Now, there are so many things that go in between that, but if two nations are conflicting, then you could have a regional arms race. And so I think, like I said, the goal is to lower competition. So I think these things have to be thought through and mapped out, and to make sure that we do it the best way possible. We don't have those unintended consequences. So to kind of close, some of the possible solutions are, we have to consider the role of the United Nations in monetary reform. I know that people think the United Nations cannot agree on anything. It's 195 different nations. But the truth of the matter is that they've had the Kyoto Treaty, they've had the treaty on mines in the ground, they've had the treaty on human rights, they've had the treaty, the Geneva Conventions on how war. People can come together if it's in everyone's best interest. Right? Monetary reform is in everyone's best interest. So it should be an international framework. Nobody has anything to lose. Everybody has everything to gain. Another thing that can work, and I know this is something that Franz talks about in a different way, but utilization of agreed data formula for creation of money. And this goes back to the accounting. Should people be able just to make whatever, or should it be based on its population, something that's fair? Something on its existing capitalistic and public infrastructure and the things that they actually need. What if nations simply agreed not to use sovereign money for private for-profit businesses, manipulation, and military spending, so that if you want to do those things, you have to use taxes. You don't use sovereign money. You use taxes created from your citizens, so that the citizens then have a representation of what you're spending on military spending. Things like that. So I think that concludes it. There was one other point I want to make before I close, and that is an update on the International Movement for Monetary Reform in our working groups. I'm saying this now because I know that there are a lot of very, very smart people and a lot of academics on this call. And our conversation with the International Human Rights Attorney, and for those that don't know, the IMMR is planning and still has a working group to actively file a complaint with the UN Human Rights Commission and their covenant on economic, social, and cultural rights. These rights cover a lot of things that we care about. Women's rights, workers' rights, education, things that companies or that countries are supposed to try to attain for their citizens. The basis of our complaint was going to be that our current monetary system precludes those things from happening. Our current debt structure does not allow those countries, those signatory countries, to actually implement things that would meet the covenants of that particular convention of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Convention. When we submitted our questions and we did a one-sheet paper to some international human rights attorneys, and we sent in also a copy of Edgar Warman's paper where he talked about this a few years ago in addressing our current system at the UN and under these particular covenants. We sent that paper in. We recently got a response back from them saying that that we really need to work on making that connection between the problems that nations are required to remedy in the covenants and that connection to our debt system. I think offhand, we could all sit up here and just say, oh, well, this, and this. But obviously, as attorneys, they want to make a very, very detailed connection. So any of you guys out there that are academics that think that you have some ideas regarding that, they said Edgar Warman's paper was great, but he said that's not enough. He said you're going to need voluminous amounts of information to make that connection. So I don't know if there's other information out there already like that. I know I had asked Overt if he knew of anything. He didn't offhand, but maybe some of you other guys with all your knowledge of bibliographies or books that's been written that can help us tie those two things together, those covenants along with the debt money system would be great. And we could use it in hopefully our future complaint to the United Nations. And with that, I will end. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. There was a lot of stuff to think about the future. I happen just to be now at Stephen's place, and Stephen has the collected library of Robert Poteet, Stephen Zarlenga, and his own. And actually, I added my own library to his, or at least as far as economics, monetary issues, and sociology are concerned. So what I found, and I started reading, and this goes to your ideas, is the book by Richard Werner, Princes of the Yen, Japan's Central Bankers and the Transformation of the Economy. And in it, I read that in the 30s, Japanese and also German economists were not in the then already emerging neoliberal way of thinking. They understood banking and they really used it, to amplify their military apparatus. And Katerina Seravimova referred to that also yesterday, saying that, yeah, you have to be careful that if a country, really has a good insight in its own banking system, it can, it can set up a credit guidance system where the banks, create credit for military expenditure and then, amplify their military. So your point of, if it's full monetary reform, that could only then be amplified. But it's something I think you should look into how Werner analyzes the understanding of, the so-called wizard of Germany, Hjalmar Schacht. He was kind of one of the architects of the rearmament of Germany. Anyway, that's kind of like, there is some research there how countries already used their insight into banking for their own, strange adventures, destructive adventures. Second thing I'd like to ask you, and maybe also if there are people in Switzerland. So when the Swiss referendum was developed, what were the signals coming internationally to Switzerland itself? I know that internally, of course, the bankers didn't like the idea, the central bankers didn't like the idea, they did a little fudging with the truth, or were outright lying, etc. But were there any signals internationally from, I don't know, the United States, State Department, big banks, already, let's say, telling their Swiss colleagues, like, hey guys, if you're going that route, we're going to pound you, and you'll lose your your nice situation in the international economy. So I think there's some empirical material out there to look into. With that, I'll leave to you to comment further on that. Otherwise, I think I have first Franz with a question and then John Howell. Mark, first something about, empirical research.
Well, I mean, I think we're looking for it. I mean, I heard your statement. I don't have it all, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm the most avid reader. I'm not. And so what I'm looking for is people to help. As far as empirical research, to me, it's there. I just don't think it's been the connection's been made properly, and I think that it can be made. So I mean, we can just take questions. I know you have a lunch hard stop, so.
No, well, you know, we have a whole hour of lunch, so we can go in there. So Franz, go ahead.
We don't want to let you off the hook, Mark.
Franz is a good academic to grill you, maybe. Franz, go ahead, unmute.
I'll unmute. Okay, Franz.
Coming up.
Yeah, you're unmuted, and
My question is whether Jussi is still there.
Whether who, I'm sorry?
The Swedish fellow.
Yeah,
Oh, it's Jesse. Yeah, Jesse's still here.
Yeah, I'm here.
okay, Jussi, I have a comment and a question. The comment
Yeah.
is that you made a very fine presentation about grassroots movements and the kind of requirement. That is my comment. And my
Thank you.
question is this. I'm looking for a nation, maybe Sweden, that might make a resolution at the UN, either at the headquarters, General Assembly, or in some of the other major UN organizations, to move for this International Commission on Monetary Reform and Transformation. And this is really important because it's there, that is the place where we, the civil society, monetary activists and thinkers want to be. And so the question is whether Sweden might be interested in taking a lead in promoting this International Commission for Monetary Reform and Transformation, because that would be the first step for us to be heard properly. So
Franz, yes, let's have Jussi. I don't know how Jussi is familiar with your proposal, but Jussi, go ahead.
Yeah, but this is the proposal that Mark, you've been talking about in the core group in IMMR, right?
Yes, we sent it in. This is the Terra proposal that he sent in a one-pager on, I think.
yeah,
So
basically,
I'm not sure how sure you're familiar with it, but it basically is a international proposal for basing the what I'll say the quantity of money for individual nation on decarbonization, not a commodity, not anything abstract, but decarbonization to deal directly with climate change, and having that be the driving force behind how money is created.
Okay, so you want to go on CU2, is that what you're saying?
yeah,
But so to answer your question, I think we would need to find a lawyer to do that work, actually, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't mind it at all, because it is like in the best of words, we would succeed, but if we don't, we get the question higher up in the political discussion, which is worth a lot, even that, right?
mm-hmm.
So could I get back to you, because myself, I don't know how I could get the time for it as it is right now, because I'm literally everywhere. Okay, so I'm thinking about to see if I could reach some lawyer who could be involved in it, and then, but you know, I can absolutely not promise anything, but I could say, yeah, it's interesting to look into it, and thank you for the question. It's a half political answer, because I cannot promise everything, only to say, sure, let's look into it. Because I think if we succeed, it is a very, very, very good thing.
No,
Yeah, I would like to-
and Franz, hold on. Parallel to that, I just want to say that the Alliance for Just Money has a petition out to have a national commission for monetary reform or inquiry established. And France wants something that like that on an international UN level. So that it will be something of a big commission indeed that will look into the international system, and I totally are backing that. Anyway, let's go on. And I had John.
May I make a comment about this commission? Because Lucille asked me a question. How about the composition and how members of the commission were to be chosen? And so maybe if, in 1 minute, I can tell what the idea is at this present moment. So the commission would consist of 24 persons, equally divided between representatives of traditional monetary thinking and action, and the other half would be monetary group like ours, who would also have 12 members. Now, how would the 12 members of our group be chosen? I suggested that would be chosen by the International Movement Group, and also by the AMI and myself. So we would have 3 people who come up with outstanding people among us, and there are many, because if they were to follow and read what has happened this weekend, there would be no difficulty of finding 12 outstanding people to be part of that commission.
Frans,
So
that sounds great. I think you should present then some proposals to the board of AMI and the board of AFJM to move that on, you know, kind of play it in a more formal way. I'll leave it at that. We're already in our lunchtime. So I go on with John Howell to pose a question, hopefully to Mark, and keep it short.
I'll pose the question. Thanks, Mark, for your concern about the international consequences. I think it's absolutely essential. But it seems to me that you speak of going on to monetary reform that is going to allow a nation to do anything it wants with no restraints. And that's absurd. The restraints will become the limits that are naturally imposed on by the availability of resources, both labor resources and natural resources. That's what becomes limiting. And if a country starts to spend beyond that, their currency will essentially deflate, and they won't be able to trade. And all nations are now interdependent and dependent on trade. So I don't quite understand why you think that countries can just do anything they want, and by going to monetary reform. I think that's just not true.
Well, thanks, John. I did say when I used the example of Russia, I said I did say the availability of workers and their resources as a baseline for that. So I have included that, but that still does not alleviate the issue of if I have an unemployment rate of 10%, and I have available resources that I can purchase or trade with for other nations, I could still put those resources in other places. That doesn't change the fact that I can still put my resources into military if that's what I want to do instead of healthcare or things that are valuable. I could still do that. And I could also still manipulate the free market by assisting private for-profit corporations and helping them to get bigger market share or unfair competitive advantage against other nations who may not be doing that. And so I'm not saying that anybody can do anything they want. I'm saying there are unintended consequences that we have to think about. If a nation does, if 195 nations, if one decides to make a mistake and it can cause a domino effect, then somebody has an argument to say this is why we shouldn't do it. And so I'm not suggesting at all that it will just be the wild, wild west of monetary creation and everything can go wrong. What I'm outlining are potential problems and that we need to figure out potential solutions to those problems, because the unknown is the greatest fear of all. And so when people have a known quantity or a known thing that they're used to doing, which is our monetary system, and you say you're going to switch it, they will come up with every reason in the world to say why you shouldn't do it and how it's going to cause the economic collapse of the whole global system and everything else. And so we have to be ready to respond to those things. Now, your response may be perfectly fine, and it may say that, okay, well, if you do that, then your nation will collapse. Okay, well, is that something that we want to deal with as an international consequence and agree with somebody who may be in opposition to what we're doing? To say, yeah, we know some countries may fail and mess it up. That's okay. We know some countries may put a whole bunch of money into their military. That's okay. We know some people may use their sovereign money to manipulate the free market in their nations and help their businesses get bigger. That's okay. Now, if we're saying that, that's fine. But I'm going to say right now, in my opinion, that will cause a lot more opposition to what we are trying to do if we don't work out how those things work on the other side.
Just keep in mind that all those things are done now under the present system.
Yes, they are.
What's new?
Okay.
But they could be on, it would be on steroids under the new system. Now, that's my issue.
It would be under natural constraints.
There are natural constraints, but there's a lot to go to natural constraints. That's like saying that, oh, well, the United States, our economy is so big and we have so few people and so much production capacity that our GDP or our productivity can only increase 2%. I don't think that's true. I don't think we really know. And that's the problem. We don't know. And so we need to think about those things. I think we look internally too much and just look at the United States and not realize like half of Africa is unemployed. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of resources. You don't know what those people are going to do. So we have to have an international, in my opinion, we have to have an international framework to make sure those unintended consequences don't happen.
I hear you. Sue, you're next. Unmute, and it's the last
question.
last question. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
And make it
Okay.
short so we can have some lunch.
I'll try. Okay, so Mark, I have two thoughts and questions about what you said. I really appreciated your presentation a lot, made me think. First of all, you're in the beginning, when you gave you talked about the basketball team. The basketball teams of the world some of them have constitutions and hopefully a rule of law. So you have to include that at the borders of these still sovereign states. And the second thing is this, when I gave my private class the deep dive into the Stephen Zarlanga's Lost Science of Money, when we got to the mid 20th century, and I was reading, Lost Science, I was reading his Stephen sources, and I kept saying to myself, Jesus, something else happened that I can't find what changed so radically around 1971. Everyone was talking about Nixon and the gold and everything. And I finally found it. I got very excited. In the book by Stephen Robotham, he's British, The Grip of Death, which is about the debt money system and its effect on the world. And he has it, and he says, not only did we go off the international gold standard with all the other countries, but we had capital control laws in place before then, and they were taken away. So the capital flowed out. And I think monetary reformers need to think and include that in their presentations, their understanding of how we can control these huge financial forces, because I think that's very significant. I just wanted you might have thoughts about it.
Thanks. So I don't, but I think that if I think back of the capital controls I've suggested, I have a lot of opinions about how stock markets operate. I know so does Mark Pash. I think there are a lot of capital controls that need to be put in place, and I think that under monetary reform on a global scale, there will probably need to be even more in place. People have a funny way of figuring out how to manipulate systems. And so from my standpoint, it just does us good to think about what the system would look like if we assumed that everyone had monetary reform and every nation created their own sovereign money. To me, it's an excellent thought experiment. I could be proven wrong easily, but I know that we need to think about it and map it out and detail it and say why this won't happen. Just as John was just highlighting, he doesn't think this will happen because of this. Okay, well, that's an argument. Let's flesh that out some more to make sure that we know all those things, and that we've thought through those things, and that we know that we can actually discuss the unintended consequences with some intelligence and with some forethought, and not be knocked off guard by somebody saying something would happen.
Yes, and
Thank you, Mark.
every
Sue.
person, wait, I have one last thought. Every
Okay, I have a
person needs to
question.
know that the money belongs to us, our country. The money belongs to us, our country.
Unless you're a dictatorship.
There you go. Well, let's not finish on a dark note like that. Mark, thank you for your thinking.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
That's good to think through, but also dig into history to see what has transpired before.
If this video is helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe for new video notifications. Please consider donating at monetary.org/donate. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter at AMI Monetary or on our website